Welcome to the final episode of Short and Nerdy Nonfiction with Chulainn Sinclair. I'm your host, fantasy author Chulainn Sinclair. As always, links to my books are in the YouTube channel description. So if you're interested in what I'm talking about, you might be interested in what I'm writing about. Today I want to go back to our topic from the first episode to close things out, which was the origin of various mythological creatures. But today I want to talk about the origins of various mythological figures, the little-known origins that I found while researching usually unrelated topics. Some of these entries might surprise you, some of them might not, so let's get started because we don't have a whole lot of time. First, let's talk about Hamlet. Hamlet is probably the most famous Shakespeare play. I apologize. Don't mean to butcher the name of the bard. He is a great writer. Shakespeare's plays are almost always taken from contemporary romances or from mythology. Hamlet is a character from mythology. We know that Shakespeare probably got the idea for Hamlet from the Icelandic saga of Amleth. Amleth is a character who is pretty much the same figure as Hamlet. The Icelandic Amlet was a Jutish, I'm sorry, I'm really butchering it today, a Jutish prince of the migration era who lived supposedly either on the Isle of Man or in Jutland proper. The story of Amleth is pretty much the same as Hamlet, except there are several differences. Amleth lives long enough to marry the Queen of Scots, has several children. The Ophelia character in the Icelandic version is a stepsister who dies not by suicide but in the machinations of the uncle. But it's more or less the same story. The Icelandic Amleth story, the earliest known version, is only a couple years before the version that Shakespeare wrote down as the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. But a lot of people assume that the Icelandic version was the origin of Shakespeare's version. That has been called into question more recently. A Welsh genealogy that somebody was going over lists an Amleth as the grandfather of King Arthur. That is completely out of left field, obviously, but it does show that during the migration period of Germanic settlers into Britain, there was contact, and obviously a lot of contact between the Welsh and the Germans. And the heroic Amleth character was inserted at some point into Welsh mythology, to the point that he is listed as King Arthur's grandfather in one genealogy. Obviously that means there was an independent Welsh-English tradition about Amleth, which could have led to the Hamlet myth. That we don't know this. It's obviously been lost to time. The fact that his name does appear in this Arthurian genealogy does suggest it. It also pushes back the origin of Amleth way far back into the kind of mythology that leads into the Arthurian stories, which is very old mythology. So we're dealing with a very traditional character, perhaps from Denmark or perhaps from Sweden, who is the archetype of Amleth. One theory that has been put forward is the Askeladden, which is a trickster hero found in Scandinavian mythology. The Askeladden, or Ashlad, as it is sometimes translated, is the youngest son of a family who is considered dumb, or perhaps crazy, or perhaps there's something wrong with his brain, and he sleeps in a fire. He sleeps in a fire that's been put out, or he sleeps in a fireplace, or his job is to tend the fire because he's so stupid he can't be trusted with any other task. But the Ashlad goes on to save the princess and become king. This fairy tale probably has pagan origins and can be linked to the Hamlet story because Amleth feigns madness as part of his plot for revenge. This could easily have been sanitized to the point of the son who feigns madness to get out of work. It's very possible. It's probably very likely. A different origin has been put forward that Amleth is a corruption of Amlabe, which is the Gaelic rendering of Olaf. There was an Olaf who was king of the Isle of Man, Olaf of the Shoe. Olaf of the Shoe was a warrior of some note who was briefly king of the Isle of Man, briefly king of Northumbria, briefly king of Dublin. He's got a huge pedigree. He is supposedly a descendant of Ivan the Boneless, but he is a historical figure who is proven to have existed. This is probably coincidence. I've talked about before, I think, on this podcast, or if I haven't on this podcast, in my other writing, that historical figures sometimes become associated with mythological figures until they are considered the same figure, even though they weren't at first. So whether Hamlet is the Ashlad or whether he's Olaf of the Shoe is unknowable. He could be both. Olaf of the Shoe could be the same as the Ashlad. The Ashlad could be a pagan story from many hundreds of years ago. In the end, it's all speculation. To get into even more speculation, there is an Irish figure, Conn of the Hundred Battles. Conn of the Hundred Battles is the progenitor of a number of Irish families. A number of dynasties claim their legitimacy by saying that their founder was a descendant of Conn of the Hundred Battles. I am supposedly a descendant of Conn of the Hundred Battles. It is plausibly where my name comes from, although I've never asked my mother that directly. But Conn is a figure who's very famous in Ireland, mostly in genealogies to legitimize various noble houses. There are a number of interesting stories about Conn of the Hundred Battles. It was said that he was given Chulainn sword by the god Lu, and told that as long as he used the sword of Chulainn, he would be king of all of Ireland. He was never king of all of Ireland. He had a rivalry with Mug Nudat, who was also trying to be king of all of Ireland. But this is very interesting because the parallels with Chulainn and the parallels between Mug Nudat and Chulainn's rival, Curoy, have attracted a lot of interest. Now, the French scholar de Jubenville theorized that Chulainn himself was a Christianization of the god Essos. Essos is a Gaulish god, a forest god. What we know about Essos is he was associated with trees. He was associated with hanging people from trees. People would commit suicide by hanging to show their commitment to Essos. And Chulainn, of course, dies heroically after chaining himself to a standing stone so he can remain standing in combat, which very well might be a Christianization of the suicide by hanging myth. At least that's what Jubainville said. So if Chulainn is a Christianization of Essos, could then Con be a further Christianization of Chulainn? It is not beyond the realm of possibility. St. Patrick, while he gets all the credit, was certainly not the first Christian in Ireland. The King Cormac Mac Art, I apologize, was considered to have been converted to Christianity, although his sons did not convert. He lived in the 300s. Certainly Christian Britain under Rome was right next to Ireland. Christian missionaries could have easily, as de Jubainville theorized, combined Essos and Jesus into a single figure, who we now know as Chulainn. And then that same figure of Essos was humorized again separately as Con of the 100 Battles. This is, of course, very complicated and very strange, but we know that a lot of Celtic mythology was very regional. And while Essos could have been humorized and Christianized and combined with Jesus as Chulainn and Ulster, Con of the 100 Battles might have been a separate Christianization in a different region. We're never going to know these things. And again, I know this is very complicated, but I hope you're able to follow along with this. De Jubainville's theories of Essos and Chulainn are somewhat controversial these days because of we just don't know much about the Gaulish Essos except for the stories of suicide by hanging and this idea that the sacrifice of a bull during the suicide by hanging ritual was part of the iconography. This comes from a Roman text, which I think is now lost, sadly. But de Jubainville said this resembles a lot of the basics of the Chulainn myth if you kind of boil it down. I'm not sure you can really boil it down. A lot of people say the Chulainn myth, as it stands with the cattle raid and the death of his son, is something that probably originated in France too, as a Gaulish myth that spread to Ireland. It's probably very old. Chulainn and Hercules are sometimes considered to be different reflections of the same Indo-European god, as is Thor. They all use a blunted weapon to kill a monster and gain great fame from it. So we might be able to discount a lot of what de Jubainville is saying about Con and Chulainn and Essos. Or we might not. We just don't know. Before I leave you, there's one last topic I want to get into on this, which is Lancelot. Lancelot is a character that a lot of people have looked into. We have to assume a lot to really talk about Lancelot. Lancelot is a character who is obviously a Celtic character. The basic Lancelot story of the human raised by the water fairy who becomes a knight and rescues a maiden at a tournament is found all throughout Scotland and England and Wales and Ireland, and definitely has a Celtic origin. But the story of Lancelot and Guinevere is possibly made up by the French writers who actually wrote down the Arthurian stories hundreds of years later. If we assume, however, that the French writers are taking the bulk of their plot lines from real Celtic mythology, as is entirely possible, A lot of these French writers spent time in Brittany. The Bretons are from Wales originally. They are a Brittonic people with Brittonic mythology. So it's possible that the things in the Arthurian romances are Celtic and might be Celtic paganism on some level. If we assume that, a lot of people aren't comfortable assuming that, but if we assume that, we can then say that Lancelot was involved in this love triangle with Arthur for a long time, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It has been put forward that Lancelot is a human version of the god Lu. Lu is the storm god of the Celtic pantheon. He is sometimes considered a Celtic version of Thor, other times a Celtic version of the Roman god Mercury. Chulainn is his son. Chulainn is sometimes an incarnation of Lu. It is thought by some that the original Trinity, much like the Christian Trinity, was Lu as father, Chulainn as son, and Tyrrheus, the thunder god, as Holy Spirit. Lancelot doesn't have any thunder motif. He doesn't seem to have much of Chulainn's backstory either. But people have speculated that Lancelot is Lu Christianized. There have been other Christianized versions of Lu. St. Moloch in Scotland was a Christianized version of Lu. It's possible. It's not likely, but it's possible. Arthur himself is considered to have originally been a Gaulish bear god. Beowulf is sometimes the considered Germanic bear hero. Beowulf meaning bee-wolf, meaning bear. In the Swedish version of the Beowulf legend, Beowulf even is a werebear who turns into a bear. We might be able to guess then that Arthur was originally a similar type of being, a bear hero who became a bear. This is all incredibly speculative, but when we're talking about trying to get to the root of mythology, it all is incredibly speculative. But what we're left with is Lu, the storm god, and Arthur, the bear god, are fighting over Guinevere. Guinevere in Welsh means white shadow, or phantom. That leaves a lot of room for interpretation of what Guinevere could have been originally. We do know that these two men are fighting over her. She's probably a sovereignty goddess at that point, and Arthur and Lancelot are fighting over her to become the rightful king. Or in this case, talking about Lu as Lancelot and Arthur as Artur, the Bear King. This is entirely speculative. It is plausible. It is the best guess we have for the origin of the Arthurian cycle based on the evidence we have currently, if you don't believe that King Arthur was an historical figure, and I don't. I've been meaning to read The Age of Arthur by the historian John Morris. Morris makes a very compelling case for Arthurian legend being based on fact. I have been meaning to get his book for a long time, but it is not on sale on Amazon currently, and it's going to take me a while to find it. When I produce season 2 of this podcast, there will most certainly be an episode where I give my thoughts on that book, because I'm sure there's a lot of very interesting trivia in it, since it is now an uncommon book that is out of print. Anyway, I hope you were able to follow along with these very speculative leaps into the past, very speculative leaps into the history of common characters from medieval Europe. And I hope you had fun. I hope listening to this podcast is fun for you. It's fun for me to produce it. It's fun for me to speak it. Writing it is incredibly fun, and I have had a blast bringing it to you. So again, this is the final episode. I will certainly post on my Instagram when the new season has been written. It'll probably be a few months, maybe into the winter. But I'm certain there will be another season of this podcast. In the meantime, I am working on a fiction podcast based upon my character of Johnny Orestes, the suburban sleuth. You will not need to have read any previous Johnny Orestes story to enjoy the podcast, and I hope to bring you that in the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much for your time, for listening, and thank you, Providence. And my clock didn't go off this time. And I hope to see you again soon when I bring you the first episode of my Johnny Orestes fiction podcast. Thank you so much.